Today is a rare day. There are very few moments in life when we often end up seeing dreams of this caliber and of this importance getting complete. Dreams that are dreamt not just by the dreamers themselves, but on other people on their behalf. Moments like Michael Jordan winning the NBA title in 91, like MS Dhoni bringing the World Cup for India in 2011. Moments like this where you see the dreamers and their dreams being complete, dreams that they have talked to the entire world about for decades, that this is something that they want to do once in their life. And when it all comes together on a day when it feels perfect, you have got to admit, a small tear does drop out from your eye. That is something that happened to me and thousands of people around the world. And don't lie, that included yourself too when we saw Charles Leclerc win the Monaco Grand Prix. The boyhood dream is complete, Kunal. And I know we could start this episode talking about a million different things, about the comedy of the accidents, about the processional nature of the race, about Ferrari finally winning, but let's just take a moment to soak in the emotion. A Monegasque driver has won the Monaco Grand Prix, which has never happened in an entire century. This is such a big moment, genuinely.
Firstly, I have to say this on the record. It is so fantastic to have you back, Somil. Opening the way you do, which is so fantastic. You lend your voice to the Inside Line F1 podcast and several other sports, including MotoGP and now Norway chess to come as well. So thank you for coming back. I hate it when you take a holiday, even though I know why you should, right? But no, it was a fantastic race win for Charles Leclerc and for Ferrari. Iconic, historic, dreams come true, all of that. I think the last time a Monegasque won was all the way back in 1950, Louis Chiron, or however you pronounce that.
Mhm.
Uh, and, a lot of people are happy with the result. Or rather, I'll put it this way, I'm yet to meet someone who's not happy with the result. What people are not happy about is how the win came through, right? It happened at the slowest possible pace. It happened as though the prancing horse or prancing horses were crawling on the streets of Monaco rather than racing.
But that's just Monaco, is it not? I mean, it's something that we should come to accept now, right? That a Ferrari car will always be fast, or a road car, I mean. That a Mercedes will always be full of brawn and full of style, and Monaco will always be processional. Do you think the expectations were slightly skewed in a way?
I think you're right. The expectations going into Monaco always is that we're going to have chaos and safety cars, and somebody starting 18th will suddenly find a podium. And that's what we all expect. That's what we all hope, because that's what's entertainment. We want to see teams, drivers, pit wall being challenged, taking all these decisions as they come. But clearly, the way Charles Leclerc won today is textbook Monaco. You get pole
Yeah.
position, drive as slowly as you need to. Because if you remember, when you go back and check our preview episode out, we said this is that one race where it's not about winning in the shortest possible time. It's
Yeah.
about winning in a way that you do not give track position away to your rivals. And that's what Charles Leclerc did. And maybe this is a good time now, Samuel, to discuss why actually were they all driving slow.
Yeah, genuinely. Let's answer that question. We know that Alain Prost back in the day was famous for driving and winning races at 90% of his overall speed. There is a reason behind that. Although Formula One is meant to be a sport where the fastest drivers win, I think in the modern day, in fact, for the last 40, 50 odd years, more than the fastest driver, the most efficient driver and the most efficient team ends up winning the race and dominates. That is precisely what we saw in Monaco as well, didn't we, Kunal? Where drivers and teams were sort of incentivized not to go faster, because if you end up doing that, you end up chewing out your tires, and the amount of time that you gain in isn't just, let's say, big enough. And passing here is going to be so hard off the track that it just literally makes it a nullified affair. So you might as well drive slow, conserve your tires, and in the case of something going wrong, just have some extra rubber with you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's actually right. And in the case of something going wrong, which means having a safety car, use the safety car to make a pit stop, because then everybody will make a pit stop at that time. So track position, like I said, is vital. And there were actually 4 races going on today. Let's just elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Firstly, of course, Charles Leclerc. He was lapping at 118, 119, 120, right? The fastest Formula 2 feature race lap was by Dennis Hauger at 122. So he
Oh,
was literally lapping as slow as he possibly could. In fact, there was times when Logan Sargent, Daniel Ricciardo, everybody, in the bottom 5 were lapping in 126s, which is slower than a Formula 2 car
yeah.
around Monaco, right? So there was, of course, Charles Leclerc, race number 1. Race number 2 was George Russell. Race number 3 was Yuki Tsunoda. And race number 4 was Fernando Alonso with Lance Stroll, right? So why do I actually pull these out? So Charles Leclerc was trying to make sure that he keeps the McLarens bunched up so they
Hmm.
cannot undercut or overcut him, right? George Russell was trying to do the same thing that Max Verstappen doesn't undercut or overcut him, including Lewis Hamilton. Yuki Tsunoda was trying to make sure that Alexander Albon and Pierre Gasly don't do the same to him. And then Fernando Alonso was trying to do that to Stroll so that Stroll takes a fresh set of tires and then tries to charge up the field. Right. So the slower pace was to nullify any pit stop advantage your nearest rivals could get. Okay, so Leclerc didn't care if Hamilton got a free pit stop under Tsunoda because Hamilton was never going to charge up to
Yeah.
Leclerc, right? But what he cared about was Piastri and Norris not getting that free pit stop, which is why towards the end of the race, we saw Carlos Sainz holding Lando Norris back because Norris had opened up enough of a gap to take a free pit stop and put on the medium tire. So it was a lot of strategy at play. And, when we look back, Somil, the strategy is what we'll end up missing out on in terms of a narration, right? Because we'll see top 10 qualified, top 10 finished the way they did, literally in exactly the way it should, right? So the emotion gets missed, the finesse of how these drivers pulled off all their race strategies gets missed.
But that is why we at the Inside Line F1 podcast do what we do, so that we can bring in these elements that tend to get lost in the middle of the entire race. So let's talk about the one key moment where the race was won. And this is special because think about it. In qualifying one, the top 6 drivers were separated by each other by literally 1/10. Top 6, 1/10. Can you imagine the margins that were on play right there? And the fastest lap in Q1 was the 111.4 by George Russell. Charles Leclerc, no, I call him Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc, let's give him that little bit of more finesse because it's his home race and he won it. Charles Leclerc qualified with the 1 minute 10.2, a literal 1.2 seconds faster in Q3. And that is where the race was won. 1.2 seconds of that Q1 lap time shows you A, great track progression, and B, a driver who has literally nailed the most important qualifying lap of the entire season. I have often criticized him for buckling out of those critical pressure moments, and Sainz tends to do better in those moments at that point in time. Fair play to you, Charles Leclerc. You nailed it in qualifying 3. That was a special, special lap.
And I'm so glad you're breaking it down with qualifying 1, 2, 3 because Leclerc was the fastest in free practices, and it was like, oh my God, look at his pace. And then he turned up and said, I'm just taking more risks than the other drivers, and whatever he was saying, right? Uh, let me actually flip that around because qualifying, like you pointed out, wasn't as straightforward. In fact, through Q1 and Q2, I was very certain Leclerc is not getting pole. And the reason is he didn't have momentum. In Q1, he picked up a sponsor sticker, so he had to make a pit stop. In Q1, he also had some pedal things that were going on. He was complaining.
Yeah.
He was out of sequence. He was complaining to his new race engineer that it was horrible to be out of sequence. And we've seen this happen with Leclerc time and time again. And I said, oh my God, he's got the pace, but just no momentum. And qualifying is about, especially in Monaco, building confidence, getting as closer to the walls, not worrying about am I out of sequence and Q and whatever. But he put it on pole even before qualifying. Between FP3 and qualifying, he had an engine change as well. Okay, so lots of tense moments for him eventually. Okay, that finally delivered that pole position, a tenth and a half on Piastri. He had to make 2 starts, tackle two opening laps. He did that with a lot of ease. Ferrari didn't buckle under all the numbers that they had to run with, what are the lap times he needs to target. And then, luckily for Leclerc, and I say luckily, the red flag was on the first lap, which means
Yeah.
every driver who started on the soft went onto the medium and vice versa, which means that it was a hint that if we can run the whole race on one set, we will. Right. And Samuel, there was just one driver who didn't make that change, and that was Logan Sargent. Every other driver was going to go till the end of the race if it permitted them to do so.
But let's, for a second, step back and talk about the gravitas of this win, about how big it is for Formula One, for Charles Leclerc, and for Ferrari. As I mentioned early on, it's a childhood dream come true. You literally cannot script these moments any better. It's things you imagine when you're 6 or 10 or 8, when you, and as Charles Leclerc mentioned, when you remind yourself of the special moments and the conversations he had with his dad about winning this race. These are the kind of dreams that get you in the sport in the first place, and then to be one of the very few people who can actually achieve it. It's such a special moment for Leclerc that'll be etched into the history and the journey of his entire career when we look back at his special moments. But the numbers behind it too. I think it's the first time since 2020 where we've had three different teams win three consecutive races, 39 races since Leclerc last won a race, and his third Monaco pole position at last converted to a Grand Prix win. Wow, that must be a heavy one to digest for him.
I'm going to add more. It's Leclerc's longest point scoring streak that he's on. He was on 16, which is long, which has now become 17th. He remains the only driver to finish top four in all the races in 2024. And then the best one, which you've written here in our common notes, is 12 pole positions without a race win, and he finally converted one. It was always, since 22, since the new era, it was a Leclerc pole and a Verstappen win, and that's what we
Yeah.
typically used to see. It's great to see, and I love the fact that three different constructors have won in the last three rounds with three different drivers, right?
Yeah.
So, very, very exciting stuff for Formula One.
And and to credit F1 stats guru where it's due as well, 45 years since Ferrari converted a Monaco pole to a win. It has happened. It gives you goosebumps. John Elkin was there, and the president of Ferrari basically being on ground wearing the most incredible Monegasque clothes and then being celebrated with by Princess Charlene. God, I love her. Then Prince Albert also being right. She's pretty, isn't she? Come on, don't make that face.
I wouldn't recognize her if she walked on the street, but doesn't matter.
Come on, you didn't see her from 2017 though. Oh goodness.
I have no clue. I have that F1 lens on. I was just looking at data and whatever else. And anyway, yeah. Wow.
No,
I
you
have to
see, that's
Google and now, or maybe check out on Instagram or wherever. Princess what?
Monegasque elegance. Princess Charlene of Monaco. So, fun fact, she was actually a South African swimmer who then got married into the royal family and has done tons and tons of work for charity and for the community there. And goodness, she is elegant. But the point being, all of those
You're
celebrities
drooling.
being, I am, rightfully so. But what a moment, right? For Ferrari in their scarlet red with the entire team, the Italian national anthem playing, the Monegasque royalty being there, the Monegasque flag over Leclerc. This is a moment you will literally put on your frame and remember for years. I know I'm going on about it for too long, but we have to because Ferrari haven't won with Leclerc for the last 2 years now.
Yeah.
It's huge.
It's incredible. And I love that there was a live band playing. The band played their own national anthem, which is easier to play than, say, the Dutch national anthem. They're also more motivated. It was emotional. The marshals were emotional. Prince Albert had his own champagne bottle, which he opened and, drank out of. Leclerc and Vasseur have been jumping into the marina. Leclerc said it's going to be a big night or whatever, something. He could have just sang that song, tonight's going to be a good night. That's what he should have sang. But either way,
Oh,
he can win and say whatever he wants as long as he doesn't say to whomsoever it may concern. And what Lando no wins, and we've got smooth operator, right? So we've got a
yeah.
few. And anyway, but with the numbers, Red Bull hasn't been on the podium for the first time since 14 races. And Verstappen, of course, on Saturday saw his eight pole position streak being broken.
Yeah.
So he is now tied with Senna. He probably has 9 more races to get pole and make his own record since he's been on a record breaking spree itself.
But let's talk about this whole scenario because normally when Max wins, we just talk about it for 2 minutes, talk about his greatness, and then move on. Luckily, in the last few episodes, we have discussed Max and his driving a lot more because we've seen more opportunities where we've had to talk about the brilliance of Max. And this time, I think we could sum up this entire weekend for Red Bull Racing by that one comment Max Verstappen made. He said, I challenge anyone in the entire paddock to drive this car at this weekend faster than me. I don't think many people could. So let's talk about why nobody could do that very well. And I think it's a little bit of a weird phenomenon, is it not, Kunal? Where a car, a lot like the 2021 Mercedes, is fast in all the high downforce sections, but when it comes to the slow speed corners and riding curbs, it's a little bit tacky. Now, what exactly does that mean for everyone listening in?
My
It's I mean,
goodness. This at
lots of
16 minutes, you're asking me a question which will straight away take us to 32 minutes. But okay, I'm gonna break it down. The Red Bull, like Max said, it's like a go-kart. It almost doesn't have a suspension. In fact, post race, one of the first comments, and he made a few comments and funny ones. I'll repeat them. Right. One of the first comments he made was, "My goodness, my back is broken." Not verbatim, but he was complaining of his back being broken, and he's been doing that the last couple of races.
well,
Right.
he's been carrying Red Bull for the last 3 years anyway. Of course, his back will be broken. Tell me about it.
That's a great one. This is why I missed you so much as I'm missing Sundaram right now for not being around. But
Seriously.
so uh, that was one point. So Red Bull are unable to ride these mechanical bumps that come on the circuit, street circuits, bumps, curbs. They are unable to. In fact, in sector 2, one of the reasons why Max was slow is he said, I just couldn't touch the curbs. Our car didn't like it at all. So through the Mickey Mouse, the slow section, he was just being off the curbs. And Mark Hughes has very nicely asked a question saying, does Red Bull's simulation tools, are they not correlating on the mechanical elements of the car? Because on the aerodynamic elements, like we saw in Imola, there was a correlation where you put it in the sim, you fix things, and you work it out
Yeah.
at the track, and it worked. But not so much so in Monaco, right? So that's just what happened to Red Bull. They just didn't have the pace. And now it's time to actually tell you some of the funny things that Max Verstappen said. He said the hardest part for me was that I had to go to the toilet from lap 20. I'm not making these up. Okay. Then he said, of course, he said, I thought the ride was bad yesterday, but today's even worse. But the best of all were the two of them. First, he said, this is so bad, and I'm now beeping out some of the expletives. I should have brought a pillow, is what he said.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then finally, when he was trying to chase Max Verstappen, when he was trying to chase George Russell, he said, I can't get any close. I'm floating with the wind. Okay, so I'll just land here. These are all radio messages he and GP were exchanging. But yes, truth be told, Red Bull did not have an answer to the challenge, the mechanical challenge that Monaco threw at them. And I would say all these years they could mask these. They had so much advantage over the others that they could sort of mask these shortcomings and still win. But Ferrari and McLaren, hats off, credit to them for actually having caught up.
But that isn't necessarily a bad thing for Red Bull Racing. Because remember, the early 2020s and the late 2010s, Mercedes were always struggling in Monaco compared to Red Bull and Ferrari. There is a reason behind that. This circuit is a heavy outlier to the point that it's unlike any circuit on the Formula One calendar, which is why a certain type of car and a certain type of design and a certain type of setup works at Monaco but doesn't work anywhere else. Remember 2021, where Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas were struggling with Mercedes, we were literally raining down on their parade saying, my word, is this the worst time to be a Mercedes fan? Because are they finally losing their championship winning streak? But it didn't end up happening completely because that circuit was such a big outlier that it exposed one part of Mercedes' weakness to that extent, which is somewhat similar to what we're seeing with Red Bull. The interesting story is that Red Bull back in the day was strongest at this very circuit where they have now conceded that one big win. And that to me is a bigger story of sorts, as you become the dominant force, Monaco starts to become less of your favorite track because your car is generally better overall. That Monaco is a place where, rather, your Achilles heel, where a smaller team can attack, which is what credit to McLaren and Ferrari. They did so well today.
That's actually very well explained, because what you do is you design a car that works around a larger range of circuits than some few of them, and that's what you literally try to highlight very nicely. And then just to also add, the Red Bull, of course, in the ground effect era,
It did.
needs to go lower to get its performance, much like any other car. But with these bumps,
Yep.
if it cannot go any lower, and that's why it has to trade performance with ride quality and so on, right? And that's one of the reasons why they are where they are. But we should talk of McLaren, because McLaren could have easily won as well. They had the
Yep.
measure of Ferrari throughout. In fact, I think they were also quicker, but track position is vital, and that's what got them, second and fourth place in the race. And Oscar Piastri, again, not a single foot wrong, had all the upgrades,
Yep.
outshone Lando Norris through the entire Grand Prix weekend.
Honestly, what a drive, huh? Seriously. And it all comes down to qualifying. Yes, ultimately, that's the main decider. But that one comment from Piastri really sticks out for me, where after qualifying, he said that if I had the Q1 of my last run, rather the first half of my last run, and the second half of my current run, I would have gotten pole position. And that is literally a moment where you can see the brain of a driver working and then realizing, dang it, that little bit more. And you can see that progression happening with this kid, and it's beautiful. You can see more and more uh, pages being added to his book, which will eventually, when it's complete, my word, is it going to be a good, meaty one.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of drivers didn't string their lap together. That's the term, as you know, we use in the world of motorsport, right?
It's a
And
nice one, actually.
it's a
It's a
lovely
good
one,
term.
right? You string all your, or you stitch all your sectors together, however you call
Yeah.
it. And I think it was Russell, it was Ricardo, and several others who were out of place. And I sort of liked qualifying, and that's what Monaco qualifying is also about, right? It's about how much time you leave on the table by not going as close to the walls, or having more margin to the walls, as you call it as well.
Yeah.
But we should talk about the opening lap, the first start. Magnussen, Hulkenberg, and Checo Perez. Of course, FIA, being inconsistent and lenient with Magnussen, has sort of seen him go away from getting a race ban, because everyone thought that's it. Oliver Behrman will be in the car in Canada, right?
Yep.
But it just so happens that the FIA have deemed it leniently, I would say, or adjudicated leniently, and let Kevin Magnussen go. What are your thoughts, Samuel? How did that all play out?
As much as I love his aggression and everything that he stands for, I think that's a whole heap of bollocks. There is no clearer incident that literally screams that a driver must be banned. Should it not, Kunal? If Romain Grosjean for Spa 2012 got a ban, and that was a compounding thing. It wasn't just that event that caused it to happen, but this we know that it's meant to be like riding a bicycle in your living room, which is what one so-called great once said. But this putting a card on the inside when there's literally no incentive, and then taking your teammate out as a result as well. I know you've been, I wouldn't say supportive of Kevin Magnussen, but rather accepting of the approach that you need to that you need to test the limits to the very end and just be as hard as you can. But come on, this surely must be one step too far, right?
I'm going to repeat what Checo Perez said. Checo Perez said that at least there should have been in an investigation of this incident. Race control said noted, and then they said no investigation necessary.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just thought that that's a bit of a bummer, because I believed that this should have been a slam dunk penalty
Yep.
for Magnussen, because he hit the wall on the right and then he went into Perez. And few people wrote to me on Twitter saying, "Well, Perez could have gone on the left." Let's remember, Perez was the car ahead, and hence he could have defended position as he would have wanted to. Perez did leave some room. It just so happened that Magnussen hit the wall first, and then to avoid hitting the wall further, he went and he decided to hit Checo Perez. And Perez's car, my goodness, in the cost cap
Yeah.
era, to have that kind of a crash is crazy.
Yeah. It's almost one of those ones where the car looks worse than it actually was. I mean, the accident looks worse. Right? Kind of like Russell's crash in Australia earlier this year, which proves how good the survival cell is. But those finances, well, they aren't surviving very well because that's a big, like a literal write-off, would it not be? Wait, at Force India, if you had that crash, Kunal, back in the day, if you had a big crash like that, is it literally like a write-off? Like you just look at the books and be like, we can't salvage anything, and you just scrap the car?
Yeah, well, the engineers will take a look and see whatever they can salvage, right? Before deciding something like that. Of course, I think Hulkenberg said it's a write off, so maybe he knows better. He was with me at Force India as well. But there was another incident because Oscar Piastri and Carlos Sainz, again, the first start that we had, Sainz had a very strange puncture. He got
Oh
lucky he could
yeah.
join in the restart, and very interesting. Carlos Sainz's brain immediately is like, Ricky is at a red flag. Oh, this is like Australia. That means I need to go back and I can actually restart the race. And he actually planned all of that with his engineer, as you'd expect Carlos Sainz to do. But every time now you guys see pictures on social media of the teeth that cars have on the floor, and you wonder, what do these even do? Now you should know that this is what they do when a car gets really close to you. The teeth go and puncture your rival's tires, as Oscar Piastri's car did with Carlos Sainz. So that little nudge, I was like, what the hell? These cars can actually
Yeah.
hit the barrier. They've all been kissing the barriers fairly hard through Monaco. That will do nothing to the tires. But one nudge on those teeth like protruding things on the floor or wherever part, next to the side pods of the car, and boom, the tires will not survive that.
Are we in the Speed Racer era? Have you seen that movie? Speed Racer, 2008. Do you remember?
No way. Oh, is there something in this desert where people were doing, I don't know, I think so, but
No, no,
maybe I
that's
haven't
Mad
seen it.
Max.
Oh,
No,
there
so
we go. No, no, no.
no,
Okay.
Speed Racer was kind of crazy. I remember my dad went to the LA, to the US, to Los Angeles. I don't know what it's called. Yeah, but he went to LA back in the day, which is a big thing for anyone in Mumbai. And he bought this beautiful Speed Racer kind of prototype. And remember, in the movie, you had buttons where if you press a certain button on the car, you could have a tooth-like protruding thing sticking out of your wheels so that you could smash into the wheels of another car and puncture their wheels. So maybe we are sort of in that Speed Racer generation. Who knows with the way things are going? Weird how volatile these cars can be, which is also what we saw with Esteban Ocon's crash, didn't we? About him just. Oh, sorry, what's the adjective are we going to use here? I was going to say stupidly sent it in, which is similar to what Bruno Famin inadvertently said. What adjective would you use for that move, Kunal, on the opening lap?
I think he was impatient, put it bluntly.
Yeah.
He was impatient.
Justified?
He, no, no, never. I mean, especially on your teammate. He knew that he's got to make the move opening lap, much like every driver did. But gosh, the way he did it, and it's it's Gasly couldn't have gone anywhere but in the barrier. Okay, and then finally coming out and apologizing much later, etc. In which case, Gasly scoring his first points despite having that first lap crash and resultant damage to the car is also fantastic. But of course, you can argue this is Monaco and it's just easy to drive around a Formula One car at Formula Two pace. But Gasly scoring points, which means 18 out of 21 drivers have scored points in the first 8 rounds of the season. The two Sauber drivers and Logan Sargent are yet to score a point because Alexander
Oh.
Albon and Williams scored their first points of the season. So 9 teams have now scored points. And what I love about Albon, and I'm actually switching to him, is they have been working on making their car quick at circuits like Monaco. And just when he could do that, and he got into Q3, qualified in the top 10, drove a race, protected his position, and then scored points for the team as well.
Yeah. And that was such a fun little story playing out in the background about them finally getting those points in. And at the same time, Yuki Tsunoda was also best of the rest again. in that whole scenario, as you mentioned, in that whole field, where, as you mentioned earlier on, he was trying to back everyone up behind him. But let's not forget, he's now, if I am not mistaken, 1-7 on the qualifying record to Daniel Ricciardo. Is it not? Whatever it is significant. And it goes under the radar, but he's not that problem kid anymore.
He's not. He's had 5 points finishes right till date out of 8 rounds, which is fantastic. He's been in Q3 again, I think, 5 times. He's 8 points ahead of Stroll. And it sort of baffles me that Red Bull are just going to completely overlook him for the second seat next to Max Verstappen. I don't know. I know that his career is heavily linked to Honda and what Honda does and goes, and Red Bull and Honda have parted ways. But Checo Perez, he's last weekend he lost second in the championship. This weekend he's lost third in the championship. So Max is there up ahead. Leclerc is at 138. Norris is at 113. Carlos Sainz is at 108. And mind you, Carlos Sainz actually missed a Grand Prix, as you remember, in Jeddah. And Checo Perez is at 107. It's his first no score of the season. You got to give him that. But imagine his scores have still not been enough because the others have, of course, finished far ahead of him and him playing catch up. How low do you think he'll finish this season?
Ooh, wow! You've put me on the spot here. Uh no,
I think
I
he'll be top 3 or top 4 because Norris and Leclerc have a car consistently that's able to give them a position to challenge. They will continue to challenge. I've taken you out of the spot now.
yeah, but again, it's one of those things where you really have to wait for a late season resurgence as well. And again, being such a long championship, there is room for something like that coming along, and that is something that I particularly am excited about because when the year began, who would have thought that McLaren would have won a race, Ferrari would have won a race, and Red Bull also would have won a race in consecutive order? That is baffling the way things have been playing out, which has only got me wondering in the entire grand scheme of things about how exciting the second half could be because McLaren now have double the points compared to Mercedes. We are now in a scenario where Ferrari are genuinely challengers, and Red Bull, that time where they need their second driver, has arrived. We were talking about this for the last 2 years, weren't we? That they need their number two driver. And until the day they wouldn't really need them, there would be no need to talk about Sergio Perez's future. Should we talk about it now?
We should because the gap is 24 points between Red Bull and Ferrari, which I think is very, very close. 24 points in the constructors is nothing, given that you can, literally score a lot of points in the constructors championship. I think you can do 26 plus 18, so that's 44 points in a race weekend that you can score, right? Which Red Bull, mind you, has done 3 times this season, so they know what it takes to get a 1-2 and a pole and a fastest lap point as well. But you're right, they will need to consider that if Checo goes on this way, because it's the second time that he's messed up qualifying, and if he continues to go this way, could they get Carlos or could they get somebody else in place of Checo? Because it's always going to be needed, like you're saying, when the others come chasing, right? And when the others come chasing, I think the two teams that will not chase the top 3 this season, and I'm making a prediction here. First is Mercedes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Russell has been, of course, outshining Lewis Hamilton in that Mercedes. Could be various reasons, but Lewis, in fact, also turned around and said, I don't think I'm going to outqualify Russell in 2024 at all. It's just the nature of what we are trying to do. So that's number one. And the second is Aston Martin. I don't believe. I mean, you can argue, or there are 16 more races and things could flip around, which is possible because 3 races ago, Max was still winning with a 15-second margin and now he's not. Okay. So, but I think the deficit is still too much for them to overcome.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, with that team, the qualifying record is 4-4. We are the Lance Stroll Celebration podcast. Of course, we are. We acknowledge him at every little moment in time. But we seriously need to talk about this because Lance Stroll, I'm not calling him a top of the line Formula One driver. I'm not calling him to be a generational talent or even a significant talent per se. But to put things into context, he has outqualified Fernando Alonso 4 times this year, which is something he couldn't do at all last year. So credit where it's due. It's either that Alonso is really messing it up or Stroll's doing really well, but the numbers speak for itself, and we've got to acknowledge it.
So the Aston Martin, after it's been upgraded, has become difficult to drive. It's not letting Fernando do his magic, which is typically punching way above the weight of the car and the package. I believe Fernando is just overdriving or forced to overdrive the car to get anything out of it. Because he doesn't want to qualify ninth and 10th. He wants to get that 6th and 7th. And that's possibly what's taken it away. So 3 race weekends in a row where I think Lance Stroll has out-qualified him, which is why I'm shocked that it's a 4-by-4 or 4 versus 4 for Alonso and Stroll. I am massively shocked.
Seriously. And with more races coming up, let's see if it's actually an accident or if it's something genuine. But lightning does not strike. Well, when lightning strikes 4 times, you know it's kind of genuine. So I'm kind of worried about the whole scenario that's happening with Fernando Alonso. But that's among the major stories that we need to talk about for Canada, which we should in depth in the Canadian GP preview. But you have something to say, Kunal.
Yes, and one more thing. Lewis Hamilton, of course, very good on Friday, then sort of loses his way. Chose to not use the new front wing that got available in Monaco, right? And one of the reasons was because of Parc Fermé. So he opted to not use it, and then George opted to use it. And if you would have crashed it, then there could have been reasons because Parc Fermé said if you use a part which is new, you got to continue using it, right? So he didn't have the same car as George Russell, which we should sort of highlight. But something strange in Lewis's race execution today, because there were 2 times when I was like, Lewis, but we know that sitting at home or sitting in the studio where I was with Viaplay today. He said, you didn't tell me the outlap would be critical. Now, this is Lewis Hamilton, who's been most famous for hammer time. He knows what hammer time means. Doesn't mean only when he's leading the race and chasing or chasing P1. I was surprised when he said you didn't tell me the whatever outlap was critical was what he asked Bono. And then the second one was, at some point of the race, he actually asked Bono saying, are we supposed to be closing the gap? Right. Which also was just before the pit stops and so on. So I was a bit puzzled. And of course, these radio messages are taken out of context in a lot of cases because we weren't privy to the entire conversation. But Lewis is Lewis, and I hope he's able to, find he's able to have a fine ending with Mercedes and not this one, because he's at 42 points. George Russell is at 54, and it's all about the magic that Lewis and Mercedes have done all these years. This is not how we want them to sign off.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, the cover of the Monegasque magazine already has romanticized Leclerc and Hamilton in Ferrari colors. And maybe that's just a premonition of sorts about what to expect with one relationship going sour. And then we're all looking forward to the other one. And the second one, the one that's been going on for a longer time, Leclerc and Ferrari, finally maturing into a beautiful, fine red wine that we've enjoyed this weekend. Well, hopefully there is more to come starting from the next races, which is going to be the Canadian Grand Prix. And for its preview episode, we know that you're going to be right here listening and watching the Inside Line F1 podcast. Folks, if you enjoyed this episode, leave us a like, share this episode with all Charles Leclerc fans and any Formula One fans in your circle who you think might enjoy this. And we shall see you rather soon. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Bye-bye.